This is Kali Persall, editor of Institutional Investing in Infrastructure. I'm here today with Ryan McComb, Managing Director of Transactions at Middleground Capital. And just to kick us off, Ryan, can you start by giving a brief introduction of yourself and your role at the firm?
So as Kali mentioned, my name is Ryan McComb. I'm Managing Director on the investment team at Middleground. I've been with the firm for about 6 years now. Prior to Middleground, worked with another private equity fund in South Florida called Wastewater Capital. And really, since I've been here, I've led a lot of our infrastructure investments.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan. So just looking at the infrastructure universe, which specific sectors currently have the greatest tailwinds from your perspective and why?
Over the last few years at Middleground, there's really been kind of three main sectors within the infrastructure landscape where we've spent a lot of time. Number one is renewables, particularly solar and wind. Number two would be water and wastewater management. And number three would be infrastructure around upgrading the power grid and the transmission and distribution space. I'm happy to also jump into, why we like those particular sectors and why we're seeing kind of outsized growth. So starting with the renewable sector, really there's been a major push towards decarbonization, making the environment green, but also kind of going beyond that. The overall levelized cost of energy for renewable applications has come down significantly over the last few years. Traditionally, coal, nuclear, dirty sources of energy have been cheaper. And so there hasn't been a push or an incentive also to transition to renewables. Solar has really become the solution that costs are coming down more significantly. It used to be prohibitive 5, 6, 7 years ago. Wind was really carrying the day because solar panels were so expensive to manufacture. But as new capacity has come online, advances in technology around solar panel manufacturing has taken hold. We're really seeing solar start to be the preferred solution within the renewable space. What's really exciting also about solar is all of the funding coming in from the IIJA, the ITC tax credits that are available to EPC firms and installers for this kind of application. It's also really exciting times to be investing in the solar landscape, specifically here in North America, as we haven't really seen the full benefit of that IRA tax credit or ITC tax credits take hold, just given the fact that in order for these EPC firms to take full advantage of the tax credit, 40% of their content has to be sourced domestically here in the United States. And the biggest issue with that, over the last few years is that capacity for manufacturing these products in the United States just is not there yet. There's only a few manufacturers that are out there. And so really what's happening is that a lot of these EPC firms, municipalities, people installing these solar projects, are still having to source panels from China and foreign locations. And so they're not able to take advantage of the tax benefits that are offered by the federal government. We are seeing that dynamic change kind of rapidly. There's a lot of solar capacity manufacturing coming online here domestically. And we think there's going to be a really big kind of fulcrum point in the industry in the middle of 2025, where domestic capacity is going to catch up. It's going to be able to fulfill domestic demand. And you're going to see a lot of other players kind of on the outskirts of the solar industry, not only the panel manufacturers, but the companies that are supplying steel into the foundational supports, the companies that are providing trackers, the companies that are providing kind of the overall solution for utility scale solar are going to be able to take advantage of that tax benefit. The next area that we kind of touched on that I want to dig into a little bit deeper is water and wastewater infrastructure. And so you've got a bunch of demand drivers there as well. One of the biggest things that's no secret is that the water and wastewater infrastructure space has been underinvested for the last 20 to 30 years. And so when you look at the dynamics around population growth is continuing to increase water consumption. Increased industrial manufacturing in the United States is using more water usage. And so the problem isn't getting any better, that water usage and the scarcity of water is a problem. And, what we've identified in the space is that it's really due to a lack of investment in the infrastructure to support water management and water systems. The last segment of the market I really want to touch on that we're very keen on is the transmission and distribution space as well. And the strain that's been put on the power grid historically. Similar to the water and wastewater infrastructure segment of the market, the T&D space has also been significantly underinvested over the last 20 years. And with new applications and new strains being put on the grid from advances in technology, such as the EV infrastructure landscape, the proliferation of AI, cryptocurrency, and the need to build out data centers. These are all, adopting new technologies that are putting strain on a grid that has already seen issues historically. And so, there's also really strong kind of funding dynamics around upgrading the T&D landscape, upgrading the grid hardening. And so that's also an area of the market that we're particularly interested in.
Thank you, Ryan. I think that's a great overview. And I understand Middleground is a private equity firm. So you guys must be pretty entrenched in, seeing how companies are responding to this stuff. Can you provide some more detail on how industrial B2B companies are intersecting with infrastructure sectors? I know you mentioned solar a lot. What about EVs, wastewater, and data centers? I know you touched on a few of those, but if there's anything to add on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that industrial B2B manufacturing firms are really kind of, part of the backbone that's going into these infrastructure solutions, right? And you might not think about it, but, to install a utility scale solar field, there's a bunch of other components that go on behind the scenes versus just the solar panel, right? There's the company that manufactures the widgets, the nuts, the bolts, the things that actually hold the solution together. There are thousands of B2B industrial companies all around the country here in North America that are creating just a small piece of the puzzle that intersect with the overall infrastructure solutions that are being put in the market today.
So how are your industrial and manufacturing portfolio companies mitigating rising material costs and the impact of inflation? And has inflation affected the cost for developing infrastructure projects?
Rising material costs has been kind of a hot topic over the last few years, and just inflation in general. And we here at Middleground know that you can't always pass all of that cost onto the customer. It just doesn't make either the project or the solution feasible. And so you have to find other ways to take costs out of the equation to still provide a competitive solution in the market. And so that might be getting the most efficiency out of your labor, figuring out how to run your equipment more efficiently, and figuring out other areas where you can take costs out of the equation. Maybe it's through automation opportunities as well. And so that's something that we've really been focusing on over the last few years is how do we automate certain parts of the processes so we can just get our manufacturing operation more efficient. That way we can offset some of the raw material price inflation or other inflationary drivers around freight, energy costs, et cetera.
Great, thank you. And then just going back to the supply chain question, how has the infrastructure supply chain changed since the early days of the pandemic? For example, are you seeing more demand for industrial components made in the Americas rather than from abroad, or what are you seeing there?
There has definitely been an increase in manufacturing activity for these types of products due to the onshoring effect, right? Supply chains, lead times got really extended during COVID and coming out of COVID, making it harder to get some of the products that were necessary to complete these jobs. And so there has been a trend for manufacturers to bring manufacturing back to America. There has been a trend for developers of these types of projects to source things domestically or dual source, where they might have only sourced things 100% from foreign sources, to open up part of the supply chain to be sourced domestically. But we think that trend is only going to continue to accelerate, and we really have just are in the infancy stages of seeing that trend play out. And the reason for that really is kind of going back to my example around solar, is a lot of the tax credits that were put in place. It took a long time for legislation to actually be finalized for developers to fully understand what they need to do and what the requirements are for being able to achieve those tax credits. I think from when legislation was put in place to when it was actually finalized for developers to understand what they need to benefit from that was a 12 to 18-month period. And so now that that is settled and the dust is settled there, we're starting to see developers look to source more domestic content to be able to take full advantage of the tax credits, which is actually making domestic supplied content cost competitive or cheaper with better lead times and some of the stuff coming from foreign markets.